Hello, I'm Bart McGeehon, one of the production managers here for the AT&T Performing Arts Center, and I'll be leading today's Tech Talk, part of our Backstage Spotlight Arts Education program. And while we usually prefer bringing students here to the center, we are taking these classes online so you can experience our technical theater training programs from home. Today, we're specifically focusing on set design and how it relates to the Center's Elevator Project series. The Elevator Project is one of the Center's programs that allows the Center to leverage its resources to help local artists. These organizations and individuals produce new projects and ideas with the support and mentorship from the Center. Today, we'll be talking with several of those organizations about their performances and how the Center specifically helped them with their set designs. First, let's talk to Sam Bruckman, the artistic director for Verdigris Ensemble, about his production of Dust Bowl. So tell us a little bit about Dust Bowl.
Sure. So the Dust Bowl really started with the fact that I had no idea what the event was over a decade. And so when I moved to Dallas, I started researching all sorts of different Dallas history and came on the Dust Bowl and started becoming amazed and fascinated by how much the story did not sound like real life. Looking through that and doing the research, I figured out that that a project on the Dust Bowl would be extremely relevant. It would be something that people in Dallas could relate to because it happened right in our backyard. I thought it would be a very compelling performance because not a whole lot of people talk about the Dust Bowl in Texas.
Holding its breath. Nothing moved. The birds stopped singing.
When I approached Bart, the production manager, he instantly said, "We've never done that at AT&T Performing Arts Center. We've never done that in the history of this place, and that's definitely not going to happen." And then 2.5 weeks later, Bart called me out of the blue and said, "Hey, listen, you will never believe this. Once on this island, the Broadway tour is coming to Dallas, and one of their requirements is 2 tons of sand. And I can reach out to them and see if they'll be able to give us the sand after they're done using it." And of course, they said yes, and so that's how we ended up with sand, which was a very big lesson for me. Just a side note that if you don't ask for big things, then big things will never come. So make sure you ask for big things.
So you've now got this giant pit of sand, and you have your audience coming in, and you have audience members that come in wheelchairs. How did you guys deal with that?
The sand was in the center of the room, and it was not blocking the two doors, both the entrance,
two fire exits.
The 2 fire exits. So the entrance and the exit. Yeah. So it was not blocking that at all, first of all. The second thing was we had to limit the amount of chairs that were able to fit in the space in order to comfortably make room for all things, including wheelchairs, to sort of get to and fro.
Now let's welcome Joshua Pugh, Artistic Director for Dark Circles Contemporary Dance, to talk to us about their elevator project piece, Aladdin Habibi.
We started the Aladdin project after I found the book sitting on a table at Barnes & Noble one random Sunday morning. I started reading the original text and found that it could be something really interesting and inspired me because my partner's family is Lebanese, and I spend almost every Sunday with them eating and listening to them speak Arabic. And so that's sort of where the project came from. The Aladdin story and the character of Aladdin himself are these iconic stories. People my age have in their mind the Aladdin from the Disney animated film. And, you know, a younger generation now has this live action Aladdin with Will Smith in it. And we have this image in our mind, this sort of cultural image of Aladdin and what that story is, the genie, the flying carpet, the Jafar and these things. And I wanted to go back to the original text that was written long before all of these interpretations came, and look at what the original story was really saying and what it was doing, and then manipulate that. And we used those things to build our world for Aladdin Habibi, and wanted to change the title to, and chose to use the Arabic word Habibi because that means beloved. And it really became a story about relationships between the mother, who's extremely important in the original Aladdin story, and Aladdin himself. And in the versions that we have in our memory, the mother doesn't even really exist. So taking the original text and making that into something new and exciting was the goal and the challenge for us with this project.
Thanks, Josh. Now tell us a little bit about the seating configuration for your project.
I wanted to do an immersive production because I think it's really interesting when the audience is surrounded by the performance. I want people, as soon as they enter the theater, to feel like they're already seeing a show. That's something that I sort of inherited from my love of Disney, the Disney animated films, and also from the parks. Every detail, as soon as you enter the park, sort of helps you engage in the fantasy, helps you leave behind the world outside of the theater, and that's what I want to do with my productions. So the idea was, as soon as you step off the elevators, for you to be immersed in this performance. And so we decided that we would have people sitting on the floor in the traditional Arabic style of seating on three sides of the stage, and the band at the back on the fourth side. So the audience really surrounded the performers, and it helped them sort of be part of the performance that was happening around them.
Now, this immersive style seating led to some complications. Tell us about those.
Unfortunately, this traditional Arab seating style doesn't work for everybody. Older patrons had a hard time getting down on the floor. People, I think, didn't all expect to be able to, they weren't expecting a performance where they were going to have to be part of it. I think, our theater patrons, particularly the ones that are in the Dallas area, expect to go see performances in a theater where they get to look at it as a piece of art that's framed and separate from themselves. But that was a challenge for some of our patrons, not being able to get down on the floor. And the way we solved that problem was to add some seating on benches and some random chairs around the perimeter of the seating on the floor. The seating on the floor came up right onto the edge of the stage, and then we had some seating against the walls for people who couldn't get down on the floor. And that's sort of how we solved that problem.
Thanks, Josh. Now let's talk to Mara about Cry Havoc Theater Company. So, hey, Mara, tell us a little bit about Cry Havoc.
Sure. So we're a youth theater company in Dallas, and we often create original work. We tend to focus on hot button topics, and teenagers are the performers.
Great. And you've done 2 pieces as part of the elevator project, correct?
Yes, Babel and sex ed.
So I want to talk first about Babel, and tell us a little bit about the piece, why you chose the topic that you did, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the set design.
Sure. So Babel was actually our second verbatim documentary piece, which means it was taken from first-person interviews. The first one we did was called Shots Fired, and it was about the Dallas police shootings that happened in 2016. And coming out of those conversations, there was a lot of conversation around guns and gun ownership and gun rights. And so we decided to create an entire play that focused on that. So that's what Babel was. For Babel, we traveled to Newtown, Connecticut to interview parents who lost children at Sandy Hook school shooting. We went to DC and interviewed a couple of senators and a think tank there. And then we actually all became NRA members and went to the NRA convention. So
And that was the NRA convention was here in Dallas, right?
It was. We also got kicked out of the NRA convention, which is fun.
Oh.
Yes. And so all of those interviews came together to create the show. And so that was Babel.
Now you had a really unique idea that you went to your set designer with. Tell us a little bit about your idea for this set and what we ended up doing with it.
Yeah, so we knew the show because it was part of the elevator project was going to be in Hammond Hall, and Hammond Hall is a beautiful room, and it felt I wanted to do something to the space to be able to do such a heavy topic. I also was struggling with how to represent so many deaths by guns each year, because when you start talking about statistics, it's easy for those numbers to not really mean anything. So I was actually driving back from Northwest Arkansas, and I was in the car for 6 hours by myself, and I suddenly had this crazy idea to do something with shoes that would represent each person who had died. And I spoke with several different people in Dallas, like, what do you do with shoes? Can you, like, what do you build? How do you do this thing? And so then I went to you, and it was your brilliant idea to hang them around the space. And at that point, it really became about creating like a tomb almost, that all of these shoes would surround the audience and the performers, and the performance would take place in the center of it.
So the audience was inside our shoe room, basically.
Yeah.
And one of the other interesting things I think that happened with that show was the projection screen. What did we do for the projection screen on that one?
Yeah. So the projection screen was actually made out of white flip-flops. So again, more shoes. And so it also, not only was it symbolic with the shoes, but it also provided a different texture for the projection to sort of bounce off of. So it wasn't just a flat, clean projection.
And one of the interesting things that I really enjoyed about the piece in this particular case was it changed every night. The set changed. And how did it change every night?
So gun deaths happen every single day, and there's actually a website that tracks the number of deaths each day. And so each day, new shoes would be added to the space, and the performance itself at the top, that actress would give the newest count. And actually at the end of the show, that count was brought back, and shoes would have been placed underneath however many people died the day before. That number of shoes was placed underneath audience seats, and the audience participated in helping pass those shoes forward and put them in a coffin. And that was sort of the final act of the show. The shoes ended up in the coffin, and the coffin was draped with an American flag, and it went to blackout. So,
yeah. Okay, let's talk a little bit about sex ed. Completely different topic. Tell us about sex ed.
The idea is sex ed, and how this idea of abstinence-only education is traumatizing young people. And Also, the heteronormative lens through which sex education is taught is also harming young people, and it was just a lot of fun.
So, what was the seating like for that show?
So it was, I guess you call it stadium. Is that what you call it? Where it's one side facing the other?
Essentially, yeah.
Alley is another one that I've heard used before. So it was essentially this runway through which, the audience sat on either side of the performance space. And so that meant there was one entrance or exit for everybody. It also meant that the audience was looking at the performance, and then on the other side of that were other audience members. So that was the configuration for this one.
There were some specific issues with that show and the way that we set up the seating. How did we deal with fire codes and handicapable seats? How do we deal with that?
Yeah, so we had to make the seating as flexible as we could within the constraints we had. So within the alley, looking at each other, one set of risers was moved all the way to one side of the space, and the other side of the risers was moved all the way to the other space. So we created really wide aisles. While the audience only went through one of those aisles to get into the space, we also had, for fire code reasons, a second wide aisle should we need to exit people quickly out the other space.
And finally, let's talk to Jake Nice, the director of Slide By, this year's first project in the Elevator Project series. Hey, Jake, I'm glad to have you on board with us today. Tell us a little bit about who you are and about the piece that you did.
Thanks, Bart. It's good to be here. My name is Jake Nice. I'm a director and an independent producer, and I work here in Dallas. The play that I most recently produced was called Slide By, and it kicked off the 2020 Elevator Project season. The play just kind of follows a high school student who used to be a star athlete at his school. He returns to his school many years later as a substitute, and he's substitute teaching the week after Columbine happened. So there's a looming sort of threat of a copycat attack, and the main character, Chad, sort of navigates his way through the school, trying to stay alive and stay safe.
And why did you, as a director and an independent producer, feel like this piece was good for the Elevator Project and good for society in January of 2020?
Yeah, well, 2020 is an election year, and gun violence in schools is something that I see, and I know a lot of other people also see, as one of the major sort of, or a major concern leading up to, an election. We want to have a leader in place who's going to make sure that he's keeping kids safe in schools, and right now they're being gunned down by each other on a regular basis, and that seems to be prevailing. It's prevailed all of my lifetime. I was very young when Columbine happened, and so something that's really important to me to sort of speak about and to do create art about.
Let's talk about the configuration. You guys did something a little not traditional in a traditional theatrical setting.
I chose that for a couple of reasons. The first thing is that it is reminiscent of, for me, what my high school assemblies were like. And there's an assembly in the play, the sort of climactic scene of the play. And I really wanted the audience to feel like that's when they dropped into the location of the play. Like, oh, all along I've sort of been sitting in here waiting for this assembly to happen, sitting in an assembly configuration. I also think it's important for a play like this that deals with such topical and really dark and challenging material, for audiences to literally confront each other.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important for the students that are watching to know is that Chad was a wrestler, and that what Jake did was basically create a wrestling ring on the stage, physically, like they painted on the floor, but at the same time, he basically created those confrontational boundaries that you would have in a wrestling match. So talk about a little bit about what we had to do to make room for our ADA patrons.
So we decided eventually to sort of cut away some of these chairs to make space for people actors crossing around the desk. And when wheelchair patrons in wheelchairs came through, we invited them to take seats on the front aisles here. And there were, I think, a couple of places where we would take away chairs from. So our first place was, down here, because there was just a lot of openness there, a lot of space, so that they wouldn't feel like they were being intruded upon, and that the actors would stay safe as well.
Thanks for joining us today. Now you can go to part 2, where we'll teach you how to do your ground plan of your very own bedroom. Happy drawing!